I'm delighted to be here. It's really good to be in this building because I've heard so much about this and the TIC over the last couple of years, and it's clearly absolutely vital to a lot of the aspirations of Scotland in terms of long-term growth, and it's good to see Linknode as the fastest mover. I have to, given what Ian was saying, I think one thing I have to say is I was very struck about how it changes people. I was very struck when I was talking to my daughter, who is virtually unshockable, when I said to her that my Volvo, I've had my Volvo since before the internet was invented. She was absolutely staggered. Not so much about the car, because she wants me to get rid of the car, but the idea of living in a pre-internet age. And when you add on all the other things over the last 10, 15 years, you've just got just such an enormous change in the way that we all live our lives and operate. What I was going to do today really was to talk a bit about the Scottish Government's digital strategy, and then to try and relate that specifically to the area of planning. And I've been doing a number of events, as it were, with particular sector groups, like I've done some on smart metering and with with geographic information groups, really just to get an understanding of how it feels from particular parts of the world. But I will now do the thing which Ian said I was going to do, which is introduce myself, having gone through all that. I'm Digital Director in Scottish Government. It's a role that was established about 18 months ago, really in recognition that digital changes everything, and that if we in Scottish Government are to play our role effectively, we have to pull together the strands from a range of different areas. And so in a world in which, like you guys, we're trying to get 25% reductions in senior staffing over 3 or 4 years, where program budgets are getting smaller. Nonetheless, we've seen this as a priority and an area for growth in commitment in Scottish Government because of its vital importance. In a sense, the way of the place I would start, and is here really. The Scottish Government's digital strategy is to become a world-leading digital nation by 2020, and to ensure Scotland's well-positioned to take full advantage of all the opportunities of the digital age. I think that word opportunity keeps coming back in so many different areas. It may be spend to save, but it's very much opportunities. And the 4 areas that we have seen as being absolutely vital to success in the digital age are those 4. And there's an odd one out, which is digital connectivity, because all of the other 3 are outcomes, whereas digital connectivity is what underpins everything else. It's completely useless on its own, but it's absolutely essential to achieve anything else. And clearly, the Scottish Government is putting a lot of money into a couple of projects for £300 million across Scotland to bring high-speed broadband to the more remote areas. And there are clearly challenges still in urban areas too, which I know the City Council here is investing in free Wi-Fi. Again, because without that connectivity, a city isn't as competitive as it needs to be. So you've got connectivity sitting there. And I think there are some planning issues to do with connectivity, which I might come back to. We then have digital participation, where, again, if you look at the opportunities of the digital age, if you've got 20% of people who more or less map to the 20% most disadvantaged across Scotland, not involved, not having access, not using digital, then it's another layer of disadvantage which needs to be addressed. And also, I think from a planning perspective, if you want to use modern approaches, if you don't have people connected, then you're always going to have an additional group you're really needing to get to. And the smaller that group is, I suspect, the easier your lives will be. The digital economy, I mean, Ian was already talking a bit about the way in which businesses change. Businesses die because they haven't changed their business model, and likewise, a lot of the really big growth businesses are developing new models based on digital technology. And in Scotland, we have many advantages in terms of skills, expertise, capacity to do what's going to be done here, which I think is to link different capabilities in order to build something fundamentally new. And I think the whole digital economy area is really about precisely that. What can government do to support those areas of excellence to thrive and export, and what can we do in terms of business support to help those companies who aren't using the internet effectively to do so and to get better at it. And again, I think there is an issue here for planning, because one of the broad issues for the public sector, I think, is the way in which we choose to procure services or define our requirements can help companies to innovate. And if they innovate and do services in new ways, then they've got a chance of growing, exporting, supporting the economy. And I do think that's quite a serious issue as we talk about the opportunities in planning. And then finally, public service delivery, which I think is the area where I guess planning sits most comfortably. I think the great challenge around digital public services is you want to start with the customer, you want to meet the customer's needs, so why do you need a national strategy? Because it's all about that personal interface. And the approach we've taken to that really is to establish a national strategy, the main purpose of which is to work out what are the things you should do once nationally, and what are the things that should either happen at sectoral level or in individual organizations. Because I think there's always this tension between doing something once efficiently, like the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, and at the other end, actually really trying to open up to innovation and different ways of doing things in order to change services. And as a result of that approach, in the national strategy, we've identified a number of priorities. And I wanted to talk about one or two of them here, because I think they are potentially quite relevant, again, to what you're doing. The first is so-called MyGovScot, which is the name we've given to our approach to online services. And really what MyGovScot is two things. One, it's the platform, the place where the public in Scotland will be able to access services, i.e. information and transactions, across all the range of public services, whether that be UK, Scottish, or local. Doesn't mean they'll all sit on there, but it means you'll be able to get at them in a straightforward way. And that will include, I think, things like e-planning you'll be able to get at them through there. But secondly, I think, is to establish standards of excellence in the design of services. Speaking in Glasgow, I can be critical of some of the services where I live, where the level of frustration you may get in trying to get from the beginning to the end of a so-called electronic process is massive. And I think this project is about trying to ensure that across the public sector, we're actually not putting paper-based systems online, but we're actually thinking fundamentally with the user about simpler systems that work online. And that, for me, that's a massive transformation program, and it has to be said that e-planning is, as it were, ahead of the game compared to many in terms of the way it's operating. The second aspect around the user, and I should have said, I've got this under the heading of digital first, because I think the approach we're trying to take here, rather than the UK sort of headline, which is digital by default, we try and talk about digital first because what we want to get across is that people will choose digital first because it's the most attractive, straightforward, convenient. You can log on at 11 o'clock at night and do what you have to do when you can actually, when you need to, rather than having to go around to an office, etc. And part of that is we've put a fair amount of work into the whole area of verification and sign-in, so that we are about to move to a national approach to identity assurance, so that using what's already underpins concessionary travel cards for some in the population, we'll have a system where basically you have to prove who you are once, and then you should be able to have access using the same credentials to just about any service. Relevant to planning, I think, for individuals on occasion, probably even more relevant when the sort of the business side of that is rolled out. And that's something that I think is part of an overall approach to simplification for the way we deal with business. So that's digital first. Second is using data well. And Ian's already talked about, I think, the big opportunities. I mean, the new opportunities really are, there are so many different sources of information available and technologies which are relatively easy to use, which allow you to draw the meaning from millions and millions and millions of data points. I mean, one of the things we did recently was we don't believe the statistics for mobile coverage in Scotland. I mean, anyone who you talk to will say where coverage is bad. And what we used was, it turns out that the ambulance service sends out a signal every 2 minutes, a locational signal. So we're able to use that set of data, millions of data points, as a way of actually mapping connectivity quality across Scotland. And that's just one very simple example of a lot of data that can be used for a very operational requirement. The work we've been doing really comes under the 3 categories. One is around personal data sharing and trying to ensure that the systems link, but also above all, and we'll come back to this, issues of culture, willingness to share, understanding of the framework within which you're working so that people do actually share when they need to. Secondly, around data linkage, where we have vast amounts of data which are okay if you look at the statistics, a set of statistics on its own, employment statistics, benefit statistics, health statistics. But if you can actually link them at the level of the individual, so you don't know who the individual is, but you do know that each individual is, a particular individual is employed, in good health, not on benefits or whatever, you massively increase what you understand about the population. So we're doing a lot of work on how do you link different sets of data while keeping them anonymous in order that you can use them. And then the third area is open data and big data, better use of public data. The whole open data sort of agenda, I think, is relevant to planning. But in some ways, some of the really interesting things here, I think, are some of the areas of innovation with big data, again, where there was the Funding Council is making a big push around innovation centres, a couple of which are directly relevant here. One is around sensors, and the second is around the use of big data. I think one of the critical things here for me around the use of big data is the innovation centre is being set up, academia and business, in collaboration with the public sector. And the idea is that they actually take practical projects to look at how data and data technologies can be applied to solve real problems and to create profitable businesses. For the public sector, what really matters here, I think, is that they will have a capacity to help civil servants and public servants to actually take problems that we have and put them into a shape that big data and data innovation can help us to solve. And I think it's a challenge and an opportunity for us all, including in the planning community, to actually think about what are the problems where if we use data more effectively, we would actually find better solutions. I think that links very closely to what Ian was saying about the opportunities. The other area I wanted to talk about in terms of the strategy was really around people, and very quickly to touch on the fairly evident stuff that you need a digitally confident workforce. And I think there was a question there. Everyone asked themselves the question, the two sides of the question. One is, do we have a workforce which is digitally confident? And second, are we giving them the tools which allows them to make the best of it? And there's work being done in that area, including around apprenticeships, in order to build that. And alongside that, the workforce, I think we're conscious at all levels, whether it's at the level of the economy, at the level of the public sector, or at the level of Scottish government, that there is a gap between the specialist skills we need and the specialist skills that are currently available. And there is a skills investment plan being developed by Skills Development Scotland on the model of the energy plan, which Ian was deeply involved in creating, the purpose of which is to try and identify how we fill the gap and to orchestrate the various public agencies to make it happen. That will be really important, I think, in terms of making a reality of the agenda. And finally, we're putting in place a development program for senior leaders around this. But for me, the important issue here is the broader issue of leadership and culture change. And I know that in e-planning, one of the strands is one of culture change. And when we talk about digital changes everything, it seems to me that one of our key roles as leaders in whatever area is really to support our teams to actually think differently about the way in which they do their jobs. And I had some quite an interesting conversation about Fife beforehand, and that can work across different disciplines, so that if you're doing things digitally in planning, then that can actually feed across to building standards or whatever. So I think there's a sideways leadership role there as well. I've referred to collaboration and value for money largely because of the importance of issues around different forms of procurement to support the ways in which we do digital things. Okay, so that's for me some of the important national priorities, which are sort of, I think, apply in general, where we are putting in place infrastructure of one sort or another to support what happens everywhere. And what I'd like to do really just before I close is maybe to say a bit about the area of digital planning. And I've picked 4 strands of activity of which I'm aware, which taken together is going to be quite important. Again, the first is a bit different because it's not about improving the way we do planning. It's more about planning, improving our levels of connectivity. And that I know that at various levels, whether it be in the national planning framework, where broadband connectivity has a potentially important sort of overarching sort of place, whether it's around more speedy planning arrangements, including permitted development rights when it comes to mobile phone masts, which are going to be an increasingly important source of access in more remote areas to reasonably high speed when we get 4G. If you get 4G masts out in remote areas, then you're really shifting the quality of connectivity all the way through, potentially, I guess, to building standards. I think one of the things which I was struck by was that for the first time that I've seen, you can now go online when you're moving house and actually check what the quality of connectivity is in the areas you're moving to. And I think that's quite an important thing for, obviously, new build activity. And I think for me there's a question about how that ties in with building standards. So that's better connectivity. Both Ian and I have talked a bit about better data, bigger data for development planning, and the potential of actually drawing on some of the new innovation centres to help shape that. improving the process with e-planning and building standards, from my perspective, looking across the board, e-planning is one of the major success stories because it's got a process online, it's got buy-in from everybody across the public sector, and it means that a large chunk of the process is being designed and done once rather than 32 times. I think one of the increasingly important sort of strands of the digital strategy in local government is to try and do things once rather than 32 times when you're talking about business processes which don't really need to change from one area to another. And I know that the next stage of e-planning and building standards is on the local authority ICT boards, sort of top half a dozen priorities for development. But clearly we're at the stage now of moving forward on e-planning and bringing building standards within the same picture. And over the next few months, I think the route to market is going to be developed. I won't say more on that, given that we've got the chief planner here, who's the owner of the e-planning tool. And fourthly, and I think really the area where LinkNode will be talking later, visualization and building information modeling. Again, Ian's already said a bit about this, but clearly it's hard to see an area where the opportunities of digital technology to give realistic 3D images and the role of that in actually both improving decision making and with building information modeling actually allowing you to develop and plan a building over its whole lifestyle more effectively will be really central. If you take all those things together, then it feels like quite a big agenda and quite a large opportunity for planning from my perspective. And you do come back to the leadership challenge of making that happen. And that, I think, is a collective leadership challenge across the whole of Scotland at both political and officer level. And I think where I would like to leave this is to come back to the core of our overall aim and aspiration is for Scotland to be a world-leading digital nation by 2020. I think the question I'd leave you with really is, what will a planning system in a world-leading digital nation look like, and how do we get there? Thanks very much.